Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Jeff Bruner, and I am excited to welcome you to a very special presentation um, by our friends at Scribble and one of our colleagues at the School District of Menominee Falls. So I am excited to introduce Victor Karkar, CEO of Scribble, his colleague Karen Kanjosian, also from Scribble, and a fellow librarian at the School District of Menominee Falls, Emily Leonard. And they are here today to speak about how to address or how to solve the AI plagiarism problem, which I know is a topic at top of mind in our K-12 libraries and beyond. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because I'm assuming that Victor or Karen is, or Karen is going to want to share theirs. So I want to let you take the reins and take over. It's all you.
Great. Let me go ahead and share my screen. My name is Victor. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's great to be with you all today live, and those folks that may be watching this, in a recorded fashion afterwards. I'm really excited to be joined by my colleague Karen, and as well as a school librarian and library media specialist, I should say, in Wisconsin that we've worked with for years now, Emily Leonard. And I wanted to just sort of quickly address the high level topic that we're going to talk about, and then we're going to dive in and talk a little bit about, how this session is going to go. So we know that there's a lot of anxiety out there right now and excitement around AI, given that ChatGPT, kind of changed the world about a year ago. And we thought we could help with the anxiety part of this. We're also excited about the opportunity that AI presents, and we'll speak about that a little bit. But I know that right now, teachers and library media specialists across the state, many have sort of concerns about this topic that's very hot right now around quote unquote AI plagiarism. So that's why we wanted to do this in a timely fashion at this point in the school year. And what I wanted to say is that there's going to be sort of two general parts to what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to present a little bit first about the sort of problem for those folks that are new or haven't really kept up with, what's going on, because the AI stuff is moving very, very quickly. And then how we believe we can help at Scribble with this issue and the downside risk of AI. And then I'm hoping to hand the mic very soon to Emily, who will kind of really talk about how they've been using Scribble at her school for a few years now. And before I kind of just dive into my part, I'll just ask Emily if that sounds good, if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yep, nope, that sounds good.
Okay, great. And the idea here is a little bit, I'm going to be presenting the theory, and then you're going to hear from one of your own in Emily about how that theory gets put into practice, from a school library media specialist perspective, right there at a school district in Wisconsin. So let's dive right in. We're going to talk first about sort of writing skills, right? Which I think many of you may know are frankly kind of the one of the sore spots in our education system. And some of you that may have sort of seen us previously on Taco Tuesday presentations or other webinars that we've done with WiLS may seen some of this and see it as familiar. But just to recap for those folks that are new, the problem that we at Scribble have been addressing for quite a while now is unfortunately kind of a long-standing large problem, and that is that half our kids in secondary in our country struggle with research skills, and they're not ready for college level writing. Unfortunately, again, it's a very well documented, longstanding problem. And the new challenge that is sort of presented by ChatGPT and the rise of AI is this, and that is that AI becomes potentially not just with a lot of promise, but with sort of some downside risk as well. And that's been validated both through probably numerous anecdotal examples that I've heard, but what I like to do is present some data around this. This was a survey that was done last summer by Junior Achievement, and they surveyed about 1,000 middle and high school age teenagers that basically said that 44% of them are likely to use AI to do their schoolwork for them instead of doing it themselves, even though 60% of them consider that some form of cheating. Now, this is a kind of a real problem that's already been happening. I've certainly heard examples of this happening across K-12 and higher ed, because I've been out there for about a year now talking to all kinds of education leaders across K-12 and higher ed, and seen and heard examples of this happening already over the last year. And the question is, why does it matter? I think that for a lot of us that are not just excited about the upside benefits of AI, but are also concerned about the downside risks, this problem really poses a challenge to authentic learning as in the way that we've known it historically, right? So the idea is that, for those of you that maybe haven't played a lot with AI, the issue is that, using an AI chatbot, students can put in a prompt for a paper that they're supposed to be writing, and essentially the AI chatbot will produce that in about 30 seconds. It's not necessarily of the highest quality. It has certain limitations that we can talk about, but at the end of the day, it gets them to some sort of finished end product very, very quickly. And the challenge here from an authentic learning perspective is that if you essentially outsource the work to the machine, you as a student are not sort of developing those key cognitive and critical thinking skills that we've always associated with the research and writing process. Things like evaluation, organization, prioritization, sequencing, synthesis, et cetera. And that's kind of been the concern of a lot of, I would say, not just English teachers, but certainly many English teachers that have been worried about the kind of risk to authentic learning from AI. Now, something new has happened as well, which is another reason to kind of care about this issue, which is that we're starting to see state departments of education, as well as offices of superintendents of public instruction across the country, putting out guidance on how do you use AI ethically, in a positive way. How do you kind of regulate or try to limit its use in a negative way? And so two examples I just wanted to call out are from Washington Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction at the top there, and West Virginia down below, their Department of Education, both basically saying that students essentially presenting and submitting work that's been generated by AI without properly citing it and without basically trying to pass it off on their own, is not acceptable. It's not okay. And so I think to date, until this started coming out, a lot of folks are just concerned on the basis of authentic learning. But I think now there's also concern of potentially compliance going forward, right? And to be in compliance with some of this guidance that's being put out there. Now, in the last year, as I mentioned, I've spent a lot of time talking to lots of educators personally, and then we as a company have done that in various forms. And when I've asked, superintendents, chief academic officers, heads of library, media services, how are your teachers responding to this issue? I've heard a lot of kind of common patterns emerge. And what I wanted to do is just quickly run through some of the common responses that I think could be sort of misconceptions or what I've been calling sort of potential pitfall perspectives that are easy mental traps that folks are falling into in downplaying this issue. So, and I'm going to just kind of list these here, but we're going to go through each one of them very quickly in the next few slides. And not everybody sort of says all these things exactly as I've stated them, but you kind of get the sense that, these are ways in which this issue kind of gets minimized in some places. So let's go through each one of these. The first one is, hey, we don't need to teach writing anymore. And I think that nobody says this verbatim, but I've heard basically some academic leaders dance very close to this line. One example I can think of is a chief academic officer saying, hey, when I was in school, I had to go to a physical library. And, now I don't have to do that because I've got one of these things. And he was holding up his phone. And the analogy here is that, well, maybe the way we used to do things, isn't the way we should be doing them anymore. And I don't disagree with that. I think AI presents amazing potential to sort of improve a lot of aspects of teaching and learning. And it will definitely change not just education, but the world in terms of what we do going forward. But I think in doing that, we have to be very careful not to sort of toss the baby out with the bathwater, where there may be more efficient ways of doing it, but we want to be careful not to sort of say, hey, we don't really need to teach writing anymore because the machine can do it for us. And I think David McCullough, famous American historian, says it in a really succinct way that I think is quite nice. Writing is thinking, and to write well is to think clearly, and that's why it's so hard. And so for those folks that are tempted to sort of say, well, we don't need to do it because it's hard and the machine can do it for us now, we want to be careful that we don't toss out the critical thinking that gets developed, especially in the education system. I can certainly see, in the work environment, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, maybe kind of using an AI chatbot to kind of get to your end work product faster. But I think our responsibility in the education environment is really to make sure that students go through the process to develop the foundational skills that we've historically associated with that writing process. Another concern or another kind of a way of kind of, I think, addressing or waving off this AI plagiarism issue is a lot of folks are saying, well, we can't really do anything about it anyway, right? AI is here to stay, so we just need to embrace it. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. And I would say, yes, we do need to embrace it. And yes, it's true that, once the genie's out of the bottle, especially in the consumer market, that we're not really going to be able to kind of, put that back. But I think the important question is that when we talk about embracing it, that's a pretty broad term. What do we mean by that, right? Let's unpack that a little bit. And one of the things that I've learned is a lot of the folks that have been saying, hey, we just need to embrace it and learn how to use it as a teaching tool, are not necessarily having the same conversation about the issues that the teachers that are concerned about student misuse are having, right? Oftentimes in education, we put teaching and learning together. And I think what's important to recognize is that teaching is not the same thing as learning, right? And teachers using AI maybe for lesson planning, or I've had examples of superintendents saying that they're using it for recommendation letters or graduation speeches or other things like that. That is a different use and a different set of use cases than a student that might be using it potentially in a not so great way to basically write a paper for them instead of doing the work themselves. And so one of the things I like to clarify is that the folks that are concerned and the folks that are saying AI is great are both not wrong. They're actually both right in many ways, but they're just not necessarily having the same conversation. And so we need to be careful and make sure that when we're developing these sort of academic integrity policies and ethical use policies, to make sure that both sides are actually talking about the specific use cases and not talking past one another, which is kind of what the cartoon here is meant to depict. The next thing is I've heard a lot of adults in the workplace, i.e. district leaders, educators saying, I use it, it's wonderful. It helps me with my work. And so I want to make sure that I don't limit it or keep it out of the hands of students. And, what I've learned is that adults in the workplace that have that reaction are not wrong. Again, I think that, it's not just acceptable that they're using AI and whatever tool they can use to help them be more productive. It's actually great because as an adult in the workplace, your job is really to try to be as productive as you can for your constituency, for your team, for your employer. But there's a difference between that and students who are at a different stage of life and are in a different mode of development, if you will, right? So we think it's important to draw a line between what we call learning mode and working mode, or cognitive development mode and productivity mode. And I think for students, we certainly at Scrible, but with educators that we work with, we think it's really important that we try to protect the foundational skills development, and that doesn't kind of just get bypassed because adults are so excited about what happens for them to use it in the workplace. And I think it's important not to conflate the two. And sometimes I've heard district leaders say to me, well, I use ChatGPT, for example, to help me create a policy for something, or to create like a recommendation letter. And I just got the first draft and I revised it and I send it off, and it did its work. And I say, that's great, but just remember that you're able to do that effectively because you know what good looks like, right? You developed the foundational skills pre-AI, before AI was really on the scene. And so when you got a first draft out of ChatGPT or something like that, you knew how to turn that base level output into something that was really tailored for your audience, that had your voice, that you're able to fact check it probably, et cetera. And so we want to make sure that we're not skipping the foundational skills development when students are early in their learning mode, so that they can become better users of those AI tools downstream when they're adults in the workplace as well. And really making sure that we are not essentially letting what I call lived experience bias impact or sort of wrongly color what we ought to be doing for the next generation, right? We really want to make sure that our own lived experience bias of why we love AI or how it helps us is not kind of coloring that decision, and we're allowing students to kind of have that. We're making decisions about what they ought to be doing from a first principles blank slate sort of perspective, if that makes sense. Another thing we've heard is, well, the way we're going to deal with this is we're just going to have students write in class. Either we're going to do it old school, paper and pencil, or we're going to have them do it in class, but we're going to turn off the Wi-Fi so they can't access ChatGPT. Obviously, that has issues, like you can still get it on your phone if you're a student. But to me, the interesting thing about this is that we just spent billions of dollars over the pandemic on one-to-one devices, whether they be Chromebooks or iPads or other things. And we did that so that students could more effectively use devices at home, especially to do things that might be really time consuming, right? And so we're going to get more bandwidth from a productivity perspective to let students be able to do digital learning at home. And now if we kind of use this solution to try to address this problem, you're essentially reversing that and sort of saying one of the most time consuming things that students can do, which is the writing process, now has to get squeezed into class time. And so it is a type of solution, but it doesn't come without cost. You're going to end up potentially sort of spending a lot of precious class time doing something that was historically done at home. And then the last sort of major thing I've heard, oftentimes come up is, well, we just want to use an AI detector because for classic plagiarism, we used to use Turnitin or a classic plagiarism detector. We could basically feed a student's paper into that, and it would tell us whether it was authentic work or copied from someplace else. Well, I think as everybody knows now, the classic plagiarism detectors don't work for this sort of new AI detection problem. And as a result, about 8 months ago, there's a lot of hype and hope that new AI detectors, both by Turnitin as well as other companies and individuals, would help save the day. That you could basically give the student's paper to this AI detector. It would use an algorithm to help you determine whether it was written by a machine or a human, and that would essentially tell you what you needed to know. Unfortunately, that hasn't really panned out the way that I think we all hoped and expected it would, right? We've had 8 months with this stuff, and there's been lots of reports of there being false detections, and in particular, students in some cases who've actually done the work being accused of kind of quote unquote AI cheating. And so, unfortunately, these things have shown to be not reliable. And so, there's a lot of teachers and I think educators that are sort of saying, well, what do we do now? Because the way that we are used to solving this problem in the old world, pre-AI, that approach doesn't work. We can't just kind of rely on some algorithm or product to tell us whether the students actually authentically did the work or not. And so there's been a lot of anxiety, and that is where we feel like we had something to contribute. What we realized was the reason why the detectors have not been working the way that everybody had hoped they would is because they really treat writing as just the end work product, right? You kind of go through the whole writing process, through all the different steps that Emily's going to show us some of that work that's done in the process. And then at the end, there's a paper, and the detector tries to just look at the text in the paper and make a determination. Well, turns out it's actually quite a hard problem to solve that way. But if you treat writing like a process and not just the end work product, it becomes a much more solvable problem. And so what we've seen, and we came to this conclusion pretty early, I think, about a year ago, but we then sort of spent the last year essentially validating this by, running it by educators of all kinds to sort of say, does this make sense? If you focus on the process. And again, we've heard, yep, not only does it make sense, but it's really the way we should have been teaching writing all along anyway, really focusing on the process for formative feedback and assessment along the way. And so what we've seen is that process over product seems to be emerging as the best practice for assessment in the AI era. And again, it's not just us. We've seen other people from different backgrounds come to similar conclusions after thinking about this problem deeply. Right here, you're seeing an example of Alana Winnick. She's a tech director from New York who wrote a book about generative AI in education. And she was sort of preaching the same thing before a talk that I gave right before ISTE. So I took a quick picture of her talking about that. Richard Collada was referenced, he's the CEO of ISTE, was referenced last year, soon after AI came out, in an article in Higher Ed about Higher Ed, saying that, if universities run into this issue and they don't know if students have potentially used ChatGPT to kind of just write their papers for them, they shouldn't immediately go to academic disciplinary action. They should actually have students show their work, right, to kind of prove that they did it. And then this was interesting. I was at a conference right before Thanksgiving where Sal Khan from Khan Academy was on stage, and this is what he had to say about it.
As I just mentioned, I think the cheating issue generally is very solvable. And it's not with these like plagiarism detectors, AI detectors. A lot of people are trying to hawk that type of thing. Yeah. Anyone who's doing it is snake oil. There's no way that you can detect whether it's, and the problem a lot of school districts are starting to use is there's a lot of false positives. And the worst thing that you can do is accuse a kid who actually did not use an AI of using an AI. And there's a huge false positive rate. The real solution is focus on the process. Support the kid better, give them more feedback, focus on the process.
And then he goes on. But, I just find it interesting that a lot of folks that are thinking about this problem are kind of coming to the same conclusion. And I think the way in which we're able to support this, this new approach or this sort of alternative approach to the problem rather than using detector really has to do with what we've been doing all along. And frankly, what librarians and teachers that have been working with us, even before ChatGPT came out, have been benefiting from. And so I'm going to kind of briefly explain what that is. And then we're not going to go super deep into me explaining the product. There's usually more that we talk about in other presentations that we've done. But I just want to give you a quick understanding of how the thing works for those of you that haven't seen Scrible before. And then I'm going to really let Emily talk about the real world application, the way that they're using the product. But we've got a couple more slides here to get into this solution aspect of how we can help solve this problem. But to really understand and appreciate that, it'll help if you see this brief 2-minute product explainer video, that it gives you a high level understanding of how Scrible works as a product. So let me go ahead and share that here.
Until now, students have had to use multiple separate tools for their research and writing work, making it time-consuming, frustrating, and hard to stay organized throughout the process. Scribble unites this disjointed workflow by bringing everything together under one roof. It's a super app for students, educators, and librarians to curate, annotate, cite, and write. With Scribble, curating information is easy. Scribble saves web pages, PDFs, and database articles instantly to a cloud-based library with just a click of the Scribble Chrome extension. You can also add files like PDFs from your desktop and Google Drive. You can richly annotate articles directly in the browser and even collaboratively annotate with others in real time. Citations are generated automatically. Scribble pulls citation information from articles and books and instantly displays the properly formatted citation. The Scribble library stores a wide variety of file and information formats. Stay organized by using full text search and tags to find articles. Scribble also empowers the writing process. Quickly generate an outline by dragging and dropping quotes and comments from your Scribble library. In Google Docs, the Scribble add-on allows you to access your library so you can easily insert your outline and bring your evidence, comments, and citations into the paper while automatically updating your bibliography. Scribble is deeply integrated with Google for Education, including roster sync and assignment integration with Google Classroom. Scribble also offers rich analytics for tracking student progress in real time. Quickly see which students are struggling and where they're stuck. Scribble centralizes student work, making it accessible in one place and enabling educators to easily provide timely feedback throughout the entire process. For students, Scribble frees up valuable time wasted on manual and mundane tasks or higher level learning, like reading critically for quality evidence and crafting strong arguments. For educators, Scribble enables personalized instruction for close reading, research, and writing.
So that's basically it. And what I wanted to do is just mention a couple things about the video. One is it's very googly because it was made originally for a Google audience. And I want to make sure that you know that we are equally integrated with Microsoft. So everything you see in the video that we do for the Google world, we do for the Microsoft world as well, in case at your schools you're using Microsoft instead of Google. We're also partnered and integrated with other platforms like ClassLink, Clever, Schoology, and Canvas. So just know that and know that there's other platforms that we're going to be adding as well. The second thing is that the video does a decent job of kind of explaining what students do, but it doesn't really explain as much about what you would see as a librarian working with the teacher, supporting an assignment. So I think I'm just going to verbally explain that to you because it's a really important thing that'll explain why we think we can help with the AI plagiarism problem. When you have an assignment in our system in Scribble, we create what's called an assignment library for every student for that assignment. And that assignment library houses all the different components of the student's work. So there's a tab for their curated research. There's a tab for their annotated evidence. There's a tab for their outline where we have an outline editor. There's a tab for their bibliography where we have their bibliography editor. We even have a tab for their paper where we embed the Google Docs viewer or a link to the Word Online viewer. We did that originally so that students' work would be centralized to help them stay organized. But the byproduct and the benefit for teachers and librarians that work with them is that that work is then also centralized for formative feedback and assessment along the way during the course of that research and writing project. And so as a teacher or a librarian, I can jump into a student's library and see, okay, Johnny's done a bunch of research and he's got 10 sources, which is required for the assignment, but half of them are Wikipedia, right? And then we have a feedback mechanism where you can give Johnny feedback and say, hey, Johnny, great start, but you got to go replace half these articles with something from one of the library databases because those are vetted sources of information. And he'll see that and he can reply and you can have kind of a threaded discussion around that topic. And so you can jump into any student's library and see any of the aspects of their work and provide feedback on any of it. And the nice thing is it's a little bit like having comments inside a word processor, but this gives you a centralized place to be able to have a discussion around a lot of the things that happen in the pre-writing process, for which there's typically not really a great centralized place to have that conversation. And this is the key part for this AI conversation. When students submit the assignment, they're not just submitting the end work product, i.e., let's say the paper in this case, they're actually submitting that assignment library along with it. And so, as a librarian, as a teacher, when I'm looking at that final work product and I'm reading that paper, I can have confidence knowing, okay, Johnny actually wrote the paper because I can see all the work that went into it along the way in the assignment library. It's kind of like having all the breadcrumbs, right, that led up to the final work product. And I don't really like using compliance language around this stuff, but if you want to think of it this way, you can think of it like an audit trail where you can sort of say, okay, I know when I look at the final work product, here's all the work that went into it, and therefore feel good knowing that, the student actually did the work and also learned all the important skills along the way as they developed all the different parts of the process that went into that final work product. And so we ourselves kind of decided to we've got analytics and data. I think, some of that might be in Emily's presentation. And so I didn't want to steal her thunder and show you all that. But if there's anything there that I think is not in our presentation at the end, I can share a slide that talks about that as well. But there's rich data that you saw a little bit of in that video, and that, again, Emily might unpack a little bit of it in the platform that kind of explains a lot of different details around what students are doing. But the one thing I did want to quickly show, which I know Emily's not going to be showing, is something new that we launched last semester, which is that once we realized that this whole process approach to writing was going to become even more important in the AI era, then we realized that we could potentially give teachers and librarians more of a sort of process-oriented view to the work students are doing. And so we launched this graph, which is our work progress detail view, where we can show you on a daily basis the kind of work students have been doing throughout that process, right? And that right now falls into 4 buckets in our platform: research, analysis, synthesis, and writing. And I can imagine we probably will be adding 2 more categories in the future. But, in a world where you weren't worrying about sort of the downside risk of AI, you could actually use this just to help students understand how they ought to be spending their time, where they ought to be spending their time. But now that we are, living in a world where you might worry about this AI plagiarism issue, you can actually use this again to sort of see, is the work actually happening? And so, for example, if you see that there's really not a lot of research or analysis or any of that going on until the end, and all of a sudden, there's a lot of writing with those teal bars at the end, that might be a sign or a warning or a red flag that might have been a copy and paste job on a ChatGPT, right? So it just gives you some a clear evidence to kind of be able to stand by that if you want to approach a student about that. So I think now that you sort of understand kind of what the platform does, we are with the student, helping them curate their sources, annotate their evidence, cite their sources, build an outline, build a bibliography, and then bring that into the paper. We feel like we're in a really unique position to do something that's really important at this moment in time. And that is really, I think we can do what we've always asked. I think we can do for writing what we've always asked students to do in math, which is show your work along the way. And I think, that gives, again, educators that comfort knowing that it's not just the end work product, again, which could have been generated by, an AI bot in 30 seconds, but it's the work along the way that shows me the students have actually been doing the learning. And I think that, whether you use Scribble or not, we evangelize this paradigm shift, this pedagogical shift about focusing on the process over the end work product. But if that is something that makes sense to you, if that is something that resonates with you, in your schools and with your teachers, then what Scribble offers is really sort of a platform that gives you the ability to implement that really quickly and easily in the ways that Emily will probably show you. And so we've got sort of a platform that helps you implement that in a centralized way, in a standardized way, with data and a lot of the other benefits that you've seen here. And I think really shift that assessment from that end work product to the process. And I think it would really help students potentially be more ethical in the way that we want them to be. Because right now, we know a lot of folks are updating their academic integrity policies and their AI ethical use policies. And that's all great. We think people should be doing that. We're advocates for that. But I think there's also a difference between telling students, hey, don't take the shortcut. And don't take the shortcut. And by the way, here's a set of tools that makes it easier to do the right thing, right? I think if we can kind of tip the scales in favor of doing the right thing, that's a better way to be. And I think ultimately this approach, as opposed to using detectors, is more instructive versus punitive, more prevention versus gotcha. It's more help versus compliance, and sets up less of an antagonistic kind of relationship, between the educator and the student. And I think ultimately what we're hoping is that if we can help with the downside risk mitigation, which is what holding a lot of educators back from embracing AI, then hopefully folks will feel more comfortable actually looking at the upside potential and the benefits, of which there are many. And then I think, one of the things I wanted to maybe kind of begin to close on here before I hand the mic to Emily is many, many, many times that I've had this conversation with educators over the last year, the calculator example comes up. And so again, in a lot of places, what I've seen is you've got 2 camps that have emerged, right? Both in college campuses as well as in school districts and schools. You've got not only English teachers, but oftentimes English teachers that are concerned about this AI plagiarism issue. And then you've got at the other end of the spectrum, early adopters, and that's sometimes tech-forward teachers, tech-savvy librarians like Emily, folks basically saying, there's great benefits here. And sometimes what you hear from early adopters is, well, remember when we all worried a lot about calculators coming into math instruction a long, long time ago? We thought it was going to destroy math instruction, and it didn't. We figured out a way to kind of incorporate it, and everything was fine. So stop freaking out. It's going to be okay. And I was like, you know what? That sounds right. There's something interesting about that. Maybe there's something we can learn about how calculators, got incorporated and sort of disrupted what we thought was going to be math instruction at the time. And what I learned by thinking about that example, and like, again, I validated this with lots of folks that we've presented to, is that really when you think about automation or technology and learning, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a question of when and how it's introduced, right? The right amount of automation at the right time in the journey can be empowering, can be wonderful. And so I think increasing levels of automation are fine as long as skills are mastered along the way. And my litmus test has sort of been to think about it as a thought experiment. Whenever you're looking to introduce a new automation, and I think at the end of the day, AI is a mind-blowing next level automation, but it is in effect kind of just an automation at the end of the day. The litmus test is it helping to develop or bypass a skill? If it's helping to develop a skill, that's fantastic. If it's helping to bypass a skill, that might also be okay as long as that skill's already been learned and mastered. And so we've seen that in math, where in the beginning, we have students, do long division by hand in elementary school. Then once they kind of master that, we say, okay, let's give you calculators so you can move on to more advanced things. And then spreadsheets and then software such as R and SAS for statistical programming in graduate school, let's say, right? And so the idea here is that, yes, calculators didn't destroy math education, but we also didn't stop teaching kids how to do long division by hand in elementary school. There's a balance there. There's a way to thread the needle. And I think like a lot of complicated issues in life and in society, the two extremes that are sort of battling it out right now in schools, I think the reality is that the truth lies someplace in the middle, and it's how do we do this in the right and ethical way? I think that's really what we can learn, I think, from the math model. And I think in a way, we already started down this path in writing years ago, because just because we've had spell check and grammar check for a very long time didn't mean that we stopped teaching kids how to do, spelling and grammar in elementary school. But we also didn't stop them from using those tools once they learned how to do that, right? To help them kind of catch mistakes and whatnot. And I think that catching mistakes thing is actually really important, particularly for AI, because at the end of the day, if you don't know what's happening under the hood of the tools and the products that you're using, you won't necessarily know what good looks like. You won't necessarily know how to catch mistakes when the systems get it wrong. And I think this is particularly true with AI, because as all of us know who've been studying this stuff, those systems, quote unquote, hallucinate, right? They get things wrong. Sometimes they make things up completely. And if you don't have a healthy level of skepticism and you don't know what good is supposed to look like independent of the technology, it becomes much harder to catch it when it starts telling you the wrong things. And I think, unfortunately, with AI, there's a risk that we end up extending the problem that we already have with the internet, which is that a lot of people just think that if it's on the web, it must be true. And I think that because AI has been presented to us in the form of a conversational chatbot, there's a risk now that we have a generation of folks that grow up thinking, well, if the chatbot told me, it must be true, right? So I think it's really important that we actually sort of teach them the foundational skills. We teach them skepticism around what you're getting out of the chatbot. And one analogy to math that I think is really interesting that somebody told me is, while a calculator doesn't just make things up, if you don't know how to use it properly, you'll get the wrong answer. And I thought, well, how can you not know how to use it properly? You just press the buttons and get what you need. But I was corrected. Actually, if you don't know what order of operations to use, you can put the numbers in the wrong way and get the wrong answer, right? And so that's an interesting analogy, I think, that also carries over from the math world. Here, obviously, we're not talking about order of operations. We're talking about other things, and those other things are going to be important for AI. And I'll just close by saying that, in case it comes across this way, we're not anti-AI, right? We're not saying you shouldn't use it. We do think it's going to be a really important part of what happens going forward. And we're thinking about how to bring AI into Scribble to support the classic writing process, as well as what we know is going to be an AI augmented writing process in the future, which is going to include students having to master certain skills even more than they have in the past. Things like prompt engineering or question asking, editing and revising, so that you can take a first draft out of an AI bot and then make it into something fantastic for your audience. And then fact checking, because again, at the end of the day, the systems have been known to hallucinate. And if you do have great research skills, then that becomes something that you can mitigate. So that's how we're thinking about it. Hopefully the process over product piece is something that really makes sense to you. And I'm going to now hand the mic over to Emily to kind of bring all that theory down to ground level and give you a real world example of how she and her teachers have been using Scribble there effectively, even before ChatGPT came out. Over to you.
All right. So yeah, so like Victor said, I'm just going to show you, I'm going to take you through how we've been using ChatGPT at Menominee Falls High School. Give me 1 second while I share my screen.
ChatGPT or Scribble?
Or, I'm sorry, Scribble. Blah. Been a long day. Okay.
That's okay.
All right. So how we've been using Scribble at Menominee Falls High School. So we first brought Scribble on in the spring of 2021. So I did a pilot with some of the English classes, with 2 sophomore classes, 1 junior class, and 1 senior class. And the feedback from the teachers and the students was awesome. I mean, their minds were blown when we first started using Scribble, because it really does automate a lot of the processes. And it, like Victor said when he was describing the app, is that it's really a super app. It's a research super app, and that we found that to be true. Like it does everything for us. And so when we get new teachers at our school and I'm first giving them the Scribble demo, their minds are blown. They're just like, this is crazy. I can't believe we get to use this. So then we fully rolled Scribble out at our school in the fall of 2021. So I did some professional development with all of our staff. And then we rolled it out to all of the freshman classes, starting in their world history class. And then I really honed in with our senior healthcare students. So some of the problems that we saw, or some of the problems that I saw before we brought Scribble in, outside of the English classes, we really didn't have a lot of citation requirements. So in social studies, if they were doing a research project, the teachers weren't requiring them to cite their sources because either the teachers weren't comfortable citing the sources themselves, or they felt like that was an extra step that they didn't want to have to require the kids to do. So social studies and science were not really requiring citations. A lot of times when I was going in and teaching research with classes, students were having a hard time going back and finding articles. They didn't have a place where they were saving their articles. They would just go in the database, find an article, maybe write down a quote, and then move on. And then it's like when you go back and you have to create a works cited page, like where did this come from? They had no idea. So we spent a lot of time tracking down where articles came from, or students were just making it up. And then we also had a lot of time that we were spending on creating citations. So a lot of instructional time for me came, and I would have to go and teach citations. Like, okay, this part needs to be italicized. We need to add a period here. And all of those very small details. And I was taking a lot of time teaching that to the students. Here's an example from a student's work that this is their works cited. It was just a Mayo Clinic URL. And obviously that is not really giving proper attribution there. So those were some of the things that we were seeing prior to Scribble. Now with Scribble, we're seeing much more improved source attribution. It's a lot easier for the social studies and the science teachers when they're doing research projects to require that there's a works cited page, because Scribble makes it so easy. Like for them, it's easy to see how they can add it, because it's not really an extra step for them to require that a works cited page is there, because the kids, they just save their articles and the bibliography is pretty much created automatically. So outside of the English classes, I've gotten a lot more teachers that are requiring those works cited pages, which is great. Scribble helps with organization and research skills, and it saves time. So it's been really, really a comprehensive platform that we use a lot in our school. And actually, I was just looking at our statistics for Scribble at Menominee Falls in the high school. And so far, this year, we've saved over 9,000 pages to Scribble. So that's just a testament of how much we use it. We use it a lot. We love it. So I'm just going to go through just one example, the Healthcare Academy capstone. So we have a Healthcare Academy at the high school, and they do a really huge research project, and it's probably the most academic research that kids are required to do at my high school. So before Scribble, I was only given 2 periods with the students. So we would spend 1 block on research and then 1 full block on citations. And then I would do citation check-ins with the kids, because the teacher was very concerned, because this was such an academic project, she was very concerned with citations. And so not only was I spending a full block on citation instruction, but then when I met with the students, I had to check in with them on their citations, and we would go through each citation by hand. Okay, nope, you missed the period here. You didn't do the hanging indent here. I mean, it was a lot. It was very time consuming. And then that was one thing that the teacher had me help with, was grading their works cited page, right? So then I had this whole rubric, and I would have to grade every student's works cited page and, take off points if they were missing a specific piece of formatting. And so it was just a ton. It was a ton on citations. Here is one example from a student. Before we started using Scribble, they're required to use MLA. The student used APA, and clearly they used EasyBib or something. I don't even know. So it wasn't great. We spent a lot of time. Here's another example of a student. The formatting was all weird. So that student got points off. Ever since we started using Scribble at our school, now I do 30 minutes of Scribble instruction, and that was with the seniors who hadn't used Scribble before. And now that we've been using it for 4 years, I don't even have to do that with seniors anymore. Like, they all know how to use Scribble. So I get to do 2 full class periods that is just focused on research. How do we use the databases? How do we evaluate evidence? How do we take notes for research? All of that stuff. And then we also do research check-ins. So instead of me looking over their citations, I get to talk to them about their sources and how they've evaluated their sources and how that fits in with the question that they're trying to answer. And I get to look at the quality of the sources that they're using. So I feel like we have done a complete 180 in this project, and the students get to spend a lot more time on the actual research, which has been beneficial. Here's just a screenshot of one of the students' libraries in Scribble. So this is their Scribble library. The teacher, one thing that I do love about Scribble is it allows the teacher to scaffold. They can create an annotation key. So for example, you can see in the screenshot, the student was checking off whether they annotated a source or not. They just added, you can create custom tags in Scribble. So they have a tag for annotated. They have a tag, it looks like, for cause and effect. So they can kind of break down their sources that way. And that's one of the ways that the teacher can provide scaffolding, is either the teacher can create an annotation key or the students can create their own keys for their own research. And I've got seniors this year who tell me that they love all of the color coding options in Scribble, and it makes it super easy to organize their research libraries, which is really great. One thing that we use a lot at my school is the Google Doc add-on. So that's something that I've spent a lot of time, more so this year than in past years, creating research organizers for teachers to use along with Scribble. And I think this really is what ties into what Victor was talking about with AI and plagiarism. We create these organizers, or I create these organizers that the teachers use. And that is just one method for students to show their work when it comes to these research projects. So especially some of the ways that we have these laid out. So I'm just going to show you. This was one that I did with a class a couple months ago. So they had to create an argumentative essay. And so I created this research organizer, and they had to insert the quote using the add-on, which is one of the awesome things about the Scribble add-on, is that it will take anything that you've highlighted in the text and you can insert that as a quote into a Google Doc. So I had all of the students insert their quotes that they had highlighted, and then they had to paraphrase or summarize why that was important or related to how they planned to answer the prompt. And then at the bottom, we had them assemble their argument. So based on everything above, whether it was a pro article, a con article, background information, they had to pull that all together and put it there. And so that is how we had the students basically showing their work. They wouldn't be able to say that they had read the articles. We would see very easily that they hadn't read the articles. They would have no quotes to insert. They wouldn't have had anything annotated. And then you can see that really easily too in the assignment library. So when teachers are assigning projects, they add me as a co-teacher in most cases, so that I can go in and I can see their Scribble libraries, and you can see not only how many articles that they've saved, but you can also see like the breakdown, like they've got a couple database articles, they have a couple web pages and things like that. So not only do the students have to save their articles to Scribble, and we can see that, but we can also see what they've annotated and then how they're synthesizing that. And really that's the biggest piece for us is, okay, you know, we've got a lot of kids who don't really know how to annotate for research. And so they're just highlighting huge portions of text. And so doing it this way sort of eliminates that. They have to learn how to annotate, because if they insert a quote that's a page and a half long, that's not going to work, right? And then we also need them to synthesize that. Like, why is that important? Okay, so you've got a 1.5-page long quote. Now explain it. So that's one of the things that we've been really doing a lot this year, is using research organizers to help, to help the teachers and to help the students as well. And then that's just some quotes I pulled from, I asked some of my teachers and some of the students. It really has been a game changer for us. Like, we use Scribble a lot. My teachers love it. Students, freshmen and sophomores are a little resistant sometimes, but once they get to the upperclassmen, they realize like it really does save them time, and it's awesome. So it's great, easy to use. We love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I wanted to ask Emily, if you have heard, or given the topic that we're talking about today, what the reaction to AI has been kind of at your school, and whether or not you find that there are teachers that are a little anxious around this AI plagiarism topic that we started with.
Yeah, I think teachers are anxious about it. And to be honest, we have not had a lot of big group discussions about how we are going to handle it. I just got back from leave, so I haven't really been involved a ton. But that being said, I really do think I would love to take that to my English teachers. I think that's a discussion that we could have. I love the analogy of showing your work and using math as a model, because I think you're right. I think we could potentially frame discussions as AI is a tool. We have to teach them how to use it. We have to teach them how to use it ethically, and then how we are going to move forward integrating that tool into our research and into classes. But I definitely think, right now there is a lot of anxiety. And even just talking to students, I was talking to a student last week who said he used the Snapchat AI. I don't use Snapchat, so I can't really speak to this, but apparently there's an AI in Snapchat. And he was like, yeah, I used the AI Snapchat to write my English final last semester. And I was like, huh, why did you use Snapchat over like ChatGPT or whatever? He's like, it's less detectable. Huh, okay, interesting. But I guarantee he didn't cite any sources or, it was probably very obvious to his teacher.
Yeah. Well, and I think the interesting thing is, I think a lot of us sort of focus on ChatGPT, right? I would have had the same question you had for him. But the reality is that there's a proliferation of AI chatbots out there. And so the fact that he used the Snapchat one is interesting. But what's interesting is, again, whether anybody uses Scribble or not, just the pedagogical approach of it will show me the work. You're not going to be able to do that easily out of the Snapchat AI or any other AI, right? Because it's going to just sort of give you the blob of text, and then you're going to copy and paste it if that's what you're trying to do to avoid the work. So I think to me, what we've seen is this process over product kind of mantra. That's why it's, I think, resonating with a lot of people. It's sort of like, again, just the same reason we do it in math, right? Don't just show me the answer, show me how you got there. And it's the learning in the education space that matters. Show me how you get there. I don't care as much about the answer as I do about what you learned along the way. So that's interesting that they're finding other ways around it too.
Well, and I think the thing about Scribble is that it is truly comprehensive, right? It's not just about citations and creating works cited pages. Like, it is a research organizer and a platform for that. And it's completely end to end. Like, it is the entire research process. And so that's what's great.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, maybe I'll just take that as a great segue, because in the video, what folks who are watching this saw was, the tools. And I mentioned that there's some analytics that I typically talk about. I think maybe I'll just take a second to quickly show that, because I didn't unpack that earlier. And that might speak a little bit to what you're saying about the entire process, because I think this kind of lays it out nicely, that we do cover really a large part of the process that historically you're not able to see in one place. And I think this is one of the things we're proud of, is that I feel like we're in a unique position in history to be able to provide a more holistic view of the entire writing process than what people have seen historically. So, for example, this is an example of an assignment in our system where we can show a teacher or librarian how many students are on target and off target for different steps in the process. For example, how many students have started the research or not, started the paper or not, or met certain goals that you would have set for the assignment when you created it. And really, so at a 10,000-foot level view, you as a teacher could say, okay, these are the students I really need to focus on immediately, because the paper's due in 3 days and they haven't even started the research yet, right? These 5 students. And so really can kind of help you pinpoint where in the process people might be getting stuck or procrastinating. But of course, we have data at the individual student level as well. So it gets you more granularity, so you can have more personalized view into each student's learning process and where they're at. So for example, we could show you Jordan here has collected 6 sources as part of her research, met the first goal of having 5-sided sources, on her way to meeting the goal of having 1,000 words in the paper. Susan's the rock star because she's all in the green and she's already turned it in. Kara here still had a lot of work left to do, right? All things that you'd love to know sooner rather than later, so that you can help them course correct or kind of get unstuck before it's late in the game. And one of the things we've learned by working with folks like you, Emily, and classroom teachers is that this process, the research and writing process, it is often a beast. We've had librarians saying I remember an English teacher I think once told me she manages this process at her school and it's a beast. And it's because there's so many steps involved and it takes a long time and all that. And I think that, what you find is that the kinds of writing projects or project-based learning experiences for which Scribble is a really good fit, they're the kinds of things that are lengthy and meaty. And so if you don't find out until late in the game that Kara hasn't done much, there's oftentimes so much work that's been accumulated over time that it becomes really hard to have her catch up and do a good job without a lot of the time stress that you normally find, right, doing it last minute. And so part of our design philosophy is we're trying to use the power of modern data and software to empower, folks like you, Emily, and the teachers that you work with to be able to make better decisions about who you spend your time with, because you now have information that can help you make those decisions in a different way. The way you described how you work with students, looking at their citations and all that, I've been in classes before kind of observing when that's going on. And what I've seen is that a lot of times historically, teachers will use kind of more of a cookie cutter approach, because of course they don't have data to kind of differentiate as well around what students are doing, or sorry, what I should say, what they're doing with their students. So, this Monday I'm going to spend 5 minutes looking at everybody's, sources. Next Monday I'm going to spend 5 minutes looking at everybody's outlines and so forth. And the reality is you might want to spend 0 minutes with Susan because she's doing great. You might want to spend 10 minutes with Kara instead of 5 minutes with everybody. But oftentimes when you don't have information ahead of time, you kind of do the best you can. And in reality, that's a misallocation of time versus what you would have wanted to do had you known that they were in such different places, right? And so I think that's one of the things we're hoping that we can provide is information that helps, teachers and librarians make better use of the limited time they oftentimes have with students during class time or in the library. And the last thing I'll say is this last column is a little bit different. It's actually about the kinds of sources students are using in their research. So for example, when they're saving information into Scribble, we're able to bucket it into some major categories. So 2 of these articles, for example, are coming from government websites. One's a Wikipedia article, again, which might be a no-no for Jordan to be using in this case, 2 are academic websites and so forth. And we're also compatible with a lot of the databases out there, like EBSCO and Gale and Britannica and JSTOR, and that list grows over time. So we can show you whether students are using those vetted sources of information that you're typically paying for in the library budget and encouraging students to use. And if so, which ones on a per assignment, per individual student basis, or are they just Googling it? And if so, what kinds of open web resources are they using, right? And this really gets into an area that we've just done a little bit of work in so far that you see here, but we're planning to do more in, and that's in the area of media literacy, which I know is very much, in the wheelhouse of librarians. We're thinking about building some other tools that would help students better evaluate sources. So just FYI. But anyway, I wanted to just unpack this a little bit because it sort of gives you in graph form a better insight and visibility into the process as it's unfolding. And you would have access to this while you're looking at the student work as well. So yeah, so anyway, the key takeaway here is process over product. And I think Emily helped kind of show you how that works in practice after we were able to kind of introduce it in an overview. So I'll stop there. If anybody has any questions, we're happy to take them. But I'll kind of let Jeff jump in and let him run the end of the process here, I guess.
Thank you so much to Victor and Emily. When Victor first mentioned having kind of leveraged Scribble to answer this question, that was one of those eye-opening moments to me where I think that it's one of those things that seems like so simple when you just say it, like, show your work. Like, oh yeah, right. I mean, that's like the mantra in so many other parts of the kind of the enterprise, and being able to kind of use a toolkit to facilitate that. I think is a great, it's such a great idea. It's a great usage of the tool and a great way to present what you can do with it. So thank you so much to both of you for talking to us today about it. I've been kind of watching the chat for questions. We've got a modest live audience today, but I know we've got dozens of people that wanted to see this and so are signed up, and so I'm sure we're going to be getting a lot of feedback from viewings of the recording. So we will be sure to kind of funnel those questions to the appropriate people to make sure that anything that you want to know about Scrible or how it could be useful in your district, that you can find that out immediately.
Thank you, Jeff. And we're obviously happy to take any questions afterwards from folks that are watching this in recorded fashion. And Karen on our team is one of those folks that will kind of field some of those questions and be able to provide some training resources and help if you need.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you to you as well, Karen. And yeah, I'm sure you'll be hearing from us. So thanks again, everybody who's watching both live and in the recording, and hope you're having a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Bye,
Jeff. Thanks,
everyone.
Emily. Thank you.
Thank you.